Here's dirt. And here's what you're looking for, pretty much. You want that. And this distance here can be pretty high. I mean, on this scale, you know, people are like this. This is really high. Now, right now, this wouldn't be very hard. You know, steel beams, blah, blah, it's fine. Well, that's not on the menu back then. So how do you do this? Well, from a statics approximation, this is kind of what they're doing. The joints here, these seams aren't very strong at all, and we can model those as pin joints approximately. Now, this ceiling, this roof, there's going to be big forces coming down, okay? Because this is heavy up here. These are sometimes they're wood structures, sometimes they're stone arches, and they've got a metal cladding or sometimes even a stone cladding on the outside of them to protect them from the weather. You'll see cathedrals that have copper shielding. It looks like that the roofs are all green. In fact, here's a picture right now. Boy, that sure looks like a metal roof to me. That thing's heavy. You know, it's held up very nicely, but it's heavy. So here's what you start with. Now, because these joints aren't terribly strong, and because none of this stuff can be in bending, this is going to want to move out. Okay, here's what your deformed shape's going to be. And it's going to collapse. And historically, they may have collapsed. They didn't have any math. They couldn't describe what they wanted to do mathematically. They had to try things. And if you go back in history, it wouldn't surprise me at all if some of these things collapsed early on. All right, that's not going to work. Let's fix this. Okay, so there's our cathedral again. I want to keep these walls from moving out. Okay, how would you do that? Well, triangles are strong. How about if I did that? That would be great. Problem. What are you going to make these out of? You've only got wood and stone. Well, the wood's, you're going to have a hard time making anything that big, especially if it's going to last very long. The mindset of the people building these is they were building for eternity. Cathedrals took many lifetimes to build. People started cathedrals knowing that their great-grandchildren would never see them finished. This was okay. These were people comfortable with the long view of things. You can't separate the engineering problem from the philosophical, social, religious views of what they were doing. They didn't care if this took forever. Right? And they wanted them to last. Well, if you make them out of wood, they're not going to last. So what do? Well, let's see. What if you could make a post like this and put another link there like that? That would work. Now this post doesn't really have any bending stiffness. In fact, we'll assume it's basically pinned to the ground. All right, that would work. Well, the problem is, as the loads here from the roof try to push these out, that goes into compression, which is exactly what you want because you're building out of stone. Compression is where it's at. And it's going to try to push this over. Well, how do you get it to not fall over? Well, you make it really heavy so that instead of the reaction forces at the ground being up and down, which is what they would be if the weight of this structural element is negligible, the weight of this structural element is not negligible. You don't get to do that. What you get is really down and a little bit of down, but that's still in compression. Now we're in business. In fact, you'll see these things, these posts, made really heavy. And you'll see, big decorative structures on top of them. They were there for aesthetics, but a lot of times those things were there just to add more weight. Well, even so, this might still fall over. Well, if one's good, two must be better. So let's just make another one. All right, that's how this works. And you can make as many of those as you want until you finally get to the ground. You can put another one down there if you wanted. Okay, so that's what you get. Now, this place in here is all open. There's nothing in it. You can look up, you can do things like you can have Michelangelo paint frescoes up there, put paintings up there if you want. You can have all these huge lofty structures because this was supposed to be an inspirational space. This was supposed to remind you of God. And you can't do that easily in some little cramped thing. So they wanted these huge soaring open spaces. They had no technology. They were clever, resourceful, and they didn't care if it took a while. So this is what they started building. And I'm going to do the center line there. The structures are basically symmetric. So from an engineering point of view, we only need to model half of it. The other half looks exactly the same as this. It's just mirrored over. These things right here, you know what those are called? Those are called flying buttresses.